WGBH TV Boston presents Crockett's Victory Garden.
Welcome to Crockett's Victory Garden. I'm Jim Crockett. I'm just finding some of those daffodils which we put in here last fall, naturalized them in the lawn, and here they are beginning to come up. One thing I should remind you of right now about these naturalized bulbs is that we will not be able to mow the lawn until after the daffodils have grown up and their foliage has matured. That'll be toward the end of June. We'll mow this lawn then for the rest of the year, just as we normally would in the spring. Well, now today we're going to prune a crabapple tree. We'll go into some of the principles behind pruning, why you prune. And then we're going to graft an apple tree so that you could have a mini orchard in your own backyard. And finally, this is tomato planting time, and let's go right over to the hotbed and we'll plant some tomatoes. Now, if you don't have a hotbed, you should use your own windowsill. Now, of course, a hotbed looks like a cold frame, except that this has a heating cable, so that the soil in here stays about 70 to 74 degrees. Now, tomatoes like warm weather, and that's why they have to go in a place like this or a sunny windowsill. Well, all of these pots that you see in here have different varieties of tomatoes planted in them. And there is one very good reason. I don't want to grow just one kind of tomato. Let's say we get the first tomato ripe in September. I want a variety such as this one. This is Early Girl. Now, this Early Girl will really come along. We'll get tomatoes early in the summer, then we'll follow along with some of these other varieties. This is a new one this year called Big Girl. I always want to try a new variety or so every season, just for the fun of it. This one is Beef Master, a big tomato, a mild one, and a great one. Here we have Jet Star, a mid-season tomato. You see what I'm doing? We have early, and then we have mid-season, and finally we'll have late ones too. Then I have Sun Ray. Now, Sun Ray is a orange to yellow tomato, very mild flavored, smooth skin, a great one. I'm very fond of it. Then a mid-early called Spring Giant, well named, good large tomatoes, quite early in the season. Finally, we come over here to Better Boy. Now, Better Boy is a great main season tomato that will bear fruit right up until the hard frost in the fall. Now, the one I'm going to plant right now is called Small Fry. This is a cherry tomato. So we have early, mid-season, late, the yellow ones, and we have some of the small cherry ones. Now, this is a 3-inch pot. I'm only going to plant about 6 seeds in there. I don't want a dozen of this one variety. If I only plant about 6 seeds in there, well, to dig them out, we plant about 6 seeds in there, what I'll have to do is to space them about a 1/2 inch apart. I don't want those things to come up and crowd one another at this stage in the game. They want at least a 1/2 inch or as much as 1 inch between those seedlings. Almost every one of these seeds will grow. The idea is if I get tied up and can't get back to transplanting these the day I would like to, they will not have crowded one another, even if they wait another week. And here I'm going to cover them with that milled sphagnum moss. This is the material I like because it will counteract that damping off fungus. Now, this needs a drink of water, and in about a week they'll be out of the ground. Well, another thing we're going to plant today are peppers, and have 2 varieties here. This one I'm very fond of, called Earliest Red Sweet, and it lives up to its name. It's green fruit that turn bright red early in the season. Nice size, good flavor. Again, I don't want too many. 6 of those is all I need. Remember that these seeds are good for 3 or 4 years, so don't have to buy new ones next year. Perhaps you can see those pepper seeds are a little bit larger than the tomatoes, and you notice that we're not having very many of them in the pot. Again, we'll use a little of this milled sphagnum on the top. Give that a drink of water. These take a little longer to come up than tomatoes, but they'll make fine, sturdy plants in this warm environment. The other pepper that I have is called bellboy. Bellboy is a good, solid fruit, chunky they call it, a fine variety that produces a great deal of fruit during the season. Well, while we're talking about vegetables, let's look over into this part of my hotbed, and I want you to see the 3 varieties of lettuce that are all ready for transplanting. This light foliaged one is called black-seeded Simpson. Now this variety has been around for 100 years and is still right up at the top of the list for good flavor and earliness. Next to it is a red foliaged one called Ruby, an excellent variety. Then back to it is my standby Butter Crunch. Well, what I'm going to do now is just take a few of these seedlings out and move them over to a special part of the garden I want to show you about. All right. But while we're on the way over to plant the lettuce, let's look down here and see what's been happening in the pansies. Remember, here a few weeks ago, I showed you this little tent that I built over the top of the pansies. What I was doing was advancing spring by at least 6 weeks. Here they're making new growth and a great many flowers already out, doing very, very well. Only thing about it, a tent such as this is, you know, it's a semi-permanent kind of a situation. You have to bury the edge in. It's rather difficult if you need to water because you have to take the whole thing off at once. Well, for that reason, I've gone today to a little system that's used in England and other parts of Europe called a cloche. And I saw a garden program from England the other day that reminded me of this. An idea that you can make, something that you can make in your own garage very easily. Now this is made out of a piece of rigid plastic. As you see, it's corrugated on the ends. It's shaped like a sort of a Quonset hut. We simply bent 2 pieces of wire, good stiff wire, which act as the legs, you might say, to drive them in the ground, to keep it from tipping over in the wind. Then we have a wire in between which holds it in that semicircular position. Beautiful thing about a cloche is that it's portable. It really takes care of cold snaps. If I were to plant this lettuce out into the garden right this minute, very could be that we would have a frost hard enough to damage it. Well, let's take a peek at some of these lettuce. Now I'm putting these in, as you see, in a double row. And what I'm doing here is, since these varieties are a little bit different maturing time, I'm setting a red one and a red one and a red one and a light colored one and light colored one and light colored one. So here we're due for a red one right in there. That's that variety called Ruby. If you've never tried that one, you're missing a good bet on gardening. Well, since that's across from that will be one of the pale ones. And this is black-seeded Simpson. Nice little variety. Goes in just like that. Now those, you see, are ready for a drink of water. Right over the top. That's kind of a watering can, so we get a gentle spray on those. You know, if you put a little liquid fertilizer in that water, again, it gives the plants a quick start. Plant them in like that, and then you slip this cloche right over the top so they have their own little private greenhouse. Isn't that a slick idea? It's something that you can really use in your own garden. Then for ventilation, you see, all you do is have another piece of a board or a piece of flat plastic here. You can take that off on hot days and let the air sweep right on through. Well, let's go from here on to pruning. I have the back of this garden an example of some, well, I wouldn't call it pruning, I'd call it butchering. Before we came on the scene last year, these trees were, you might say, attacked with someone with a pair of lopping shears, cut off the ends of these stems, leaving stubs such as this. detracting from the natural shape of the tree. This tree should be an oval shape, should come right down practically to the ground to display its blossoms in the most beautiful way possible. And I consider it's a shame to cut a tree back like that. But that wasn't all that they did. Look down in here. See this cut? This cut is out 1.5 inches from the trunk. There is no way in the world for sap to come out here to build new growth and cover that dead stump. What will happen, of course, is that rot will set in. The rot will go right on down the inside of there. We'll have a tree to make a good home for woodpeckers, but it certainly won't keep the tree growing. Now here's an example of what should happen from a good pruning cut. You see this new cells, and they build around the edge, and they come together, and they will cover that completely. This cut, by the way, was painted with a tree pruning paint so as to try to keep disease from getting into it. One thing that happened to this tree, because so many big branches were taken off at one time, was that the tree set out a bunch of these non-flowering stems we call water sprouts or suckers. These will not blossom for a long, long time, and what they're doing is making this tree look something like a witch's broom. Not attractive at all. So one of the things we should do now is to get rid of these fellows. And when we get rid of them, this is what I'd like you to notice. At the base of each water sprout is a swelling. Now, if that swelling is not removed flush with the tree trunk, what happens is you get, instead of one water sucker, you'll get a dozen maybe come out of that same place this year. 2 or 3 surely will come from there, and next spring your problem will be worse than it is now. So take your pruning saw, go right in close to that, and cut that thing off flush. Now any cut like that, which is less than 1 inch in diameter, does not need to be painted, but larger cuts should be painted. Well, let's move on around the tree to a little bigger branch, and I want to show you what's been happening up in here. If you notice up here at the top, there are crossing branches which have practically grown together, rubbing on one another. Another place is rubbing on up at the top there. This branch is entirely superfluous. The tree doesn't need it for shape, nor does it need it for good development. This is this tree, let me tell you, you should never ever allow a branch to get this big before you have to cut it. A good man in pruning removes the growth while it's small, under 1 inch in size if possible. But here comes the trick on pruning. If I were to cut this branch right straight down there, chances are the weight of it would be so great as I got to the bottom of the cut, the whole darn thing would pull out of my hand and rip a big strip of bark right off the trunk. So I'm going to get rid of it first by making 2 cuts. The first one up here on the underneath side of that stem. Go through about halfway, then come across on the top, make another cut. When that comes down, there we are. That one's out of the way, and now I have something that I can handle. Something I can put my hand on and grip it, so I'll be in control of this next cut that I make. Well, the next cut, they say we want to get something about like that, which means if you want to sort of trace this out a little bit, you can know about what you want to do. So we'll start right down here and cut again up from the bottom. While we're cutting, I should tell you what a pruning saw does for you. A pruning saw is unlike the saw that you use for cutting wood in carpentry. For one thing, it has this bowed shape, and the bowed shape helps you to dig in with less effort. But the big thing is that the teeth on this saw are widely set apart. That means that the saw cuts a wide swath through and doesn't bind. If you were to use an ordinary carpenter's saw on this, about the time that the blade got in this far, wouldn't be able to pull it. The trick at this point is to have these cuts come out somewhere near even. Long way through this fella. Okay, now that is a successful cut. Perfectly smooth over here. The healing process will take place on all directions. Pretty good size cut. So I'm going to use some, it's called tree healing paint, that you put over a wound such as this. Now at this time of year, it's a good time of the year to prune most trees. Not a good time of the year to prune maple trees. After you know, this is the time when the sap is rising on the maple trees. Also, the sap will bleed from a black walnut and also a birch. Those varieties are best pruned in the fall. Now we come to what I think is the fun part of the program. I have here a young apple tree. This tree was sent to me as a bonus. I guess I didn't know at one time what variety it was, but I don't remember. What I'm going to do is to save one of the branches from this tree, so I will find out whether it was a good apple or not. But I'm going to make a mini orchard right here and graft 5 different kinds of apples on this one tree. You can imagine how good that's going to be. First of all, this tree is a dwarf tree. It will never grow more than 12 or 15 feet tall, more apt to be about 10 feet tall. You'll have 5 varieties of apples on it. Suppose you have a small backyard. This is the kind of a thing to have. You don't want a 25-foot or a 30-foot apple tree. If you do, you have to get one variety and 20 bushels of apples, all at the same time, all of the same variety, and no place to store them. Well, if you look over on here, I've put 2 grafts of a variety, an old-time apple called the Roxbury Russet. Now, if you want to get an old-time apples, write to the Worcester County Horticultural Society in Worcester, Massachusetts. They have many of the old-time varieties, and they'll sell you little pieces of the stem called scions. Now, if you notice that what I'm doing here is removing the side branches. I want all of the energy on this stem to go onto the new variety, which I will graft up here. And the variety that I'm going to graft is a favorite one of many of us, called the Macintosh. We'll start with this. This is called the stock. And I will simply cut this fellow off just like that. This is going to be the mother. And from this and on that, I'm going to put a piece of stem of this variety, which is the Macintosh. I have in my own yard an apple tree with 5 different kinds of apples on it. My wife Margaret says, well, you know, they don't all blossom at the same time. It looks a little peculiar. Well, it does, but it serves a very good purpose, because apples often do better, produce larger crops, if they're cross-pollinated. And if there are several varieties all in blossom at one time, then you're bound to have some cross-pollination. The object here first of all, is to be sure that you have the top end of the stem upwards. We're going to slip one of these right down inside the other. They will grow together. This branch will have Macintosh apples on it. First thing I do is to take this old knife of mine and slice down through the stem for about an inch or an inch and a half. Then I'll take this cut here and I'm going to cut this into a wedge shape. A slice from that side and another slice from this side so that they form a wedge. The object now is to slide those together so that the bark of both meet as closely as possible right there. Now we'll take a piece of string. I like just plain old cotton string, tie it around there to bind it together. All it takes is a little slip like that. The next thing we have to do is to seal out the air. I can see this old pot of mine with the grafting wax in it. Again, all I'm going to do here is to seal around that joint. That will allow the growth to take place under the protection of this wax. Put a little daub of the wax right on the end of that too to keep it from drying out. Well, you may not know it, but I know it, that this is going to grow. And if you watch this program, you'll see later on we'll have new growth coming right out of here, and this branch will bear, eventually will bear Macintosh apples. And we can do the same thing on branch after branch. A couple of things I'd like to point out to you on growing a tree of this type is the value of its initial training. You notice how this branch comes out here at almost a 90 degree angle? That builds strong wood in at this point on the tree and makes a very, very strong branch which will hold great quantities of fruit without snapping off. What you want to avoid in pruning and also in growing any kind of a tree is those crotches which are narrow. Bark forms down in here, along comes a good windstorm, and one or the other or both of those branches topple down onto the ground. Well, what I'm going to do here is just kind of do a little pruning on this tree to further its development. We are not interested in this tree growing up very tall. I'm going to come right in here and get this top out of it, like that. Now, beginning to take shape. I'm not interested in these little side branches in here. If you've looked at the quality of fruit that you buy, you usually pay more for the fruit that has the bright red color, let's say. The fruit that's on the greenish stage is not as good flavored nor as desirable as the fruit that grows out in the light. By taking out these inner branches, we end up by letting the sunshine get in here, and we got a nice tree. Now, if you have questions on gardening, would you send them to Crockett's Victory Garden, WGBH, Boston 02134. While I'm on my way here into the greenhouse to answer questions, I'd like to stop here just a minute to point out some of the flowers that have come into blossom recently. This is the Gold Coast lily, a hardy lily. The bulbs eventually can go out into my garden and will blossom for years. Then down next to it is the Star of Bethlehem, those bright black spots in the center of the white flowers. And then we have a new lily coming into blossom, and that one is called Cinnabar, another perfectly hardy lily, a great one to go into your garden after you've had the fun of forcing them on a cool windowsill. Well, let me get to a couple of questions today. This first one is from Kathy Doucette, who said, I have dozens of tulip bulbs which I never planted last fall. They wintered in my unheated garage. Can I plant them this fall? No, you can't plant them this fall, but there is just a chance that you can keep them alive by planting them outdoors right away. awfully bad idea to keep them over, but don't just throw them away. If you're Yankee enough, you give them one more try, but don't save them till fall again. Ann Berghaus said, I fell in love with the pole beans you planted last year with the red flowers on them. Please tell me their name. It was a scarlet runner beans, and you can find them listed in any seed catalog. Barbara Burke says, my 2 rubber plants have lost most of their lower leaves. I'm careful about their watering now, but probably overwatered before. Any suggestions to improve their appearance? Yes, there is. This is our rubber tree, which got tall and gawky and was losing some of its lower leaves, and so I put an air layer on it. I don't know if you can see in here, but this is getting filled with young roots. Very shortly we'll cut this off, put it in a flower pot. We'll have this handsome young plant growing where this ugly old one was before. That's the way to handle them. Kay Dutton said, whatever happened to that plant that looked dead, that you cut all the leaves off and transplanted and said, have faith in me, I know what I'm doing? Well, that one, I'm afraid, is, where is it? Way back at the far end of the greenhouse someplace. Oh, here it is. Let's take a peek at that one. You see what has happened? It did send out new leaves, great new growth. This plant will go on to make a handsome specimen. It does work. Don't be afraid of your plants. They'll grow for you. Jeannie LeBlanc said, right now my poinsettias are beautiful. I cut them back and they're full of new leaves. I keep them on short daylight and long hours of darkness. What is the next step? Well, you took one step too many. They don't need those short days now. They just grow an ordinary day length. Next fall in September is when you give them the short days so that they'll make flower buds to blossom at Christmas time. Well, now my tip for today has to do with these wonderful things called peat pots. These disintegrate in the soil after you've planted them. Roots go right through them. But be very, very careful after you have filled them that you water them. Can you see the difference in the color between the moist ones and the dry ones? If they're not moist enough, this peat pot will suck moisture out of the soil, and the soil itself will dry. One more tip from Crockett's Victory Garden. Hope you enjoy the program every week.